Hello, world. I'm Jack, and welcome to English Speaking Studio.
I'm Lucy. So what are you waiting for? Let's dive in and make learning English an unforgettable journey.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of you are going to relate to, and that is perfectionism.
Ooh,
Perfectionism.
big one.
You might be struggling with it yourself, or you're seeing it in people around you, but have you ever wondered, is it actually a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah,
Is it a blessing? Is it a curse?
right.
Well, we're going to find out today. We're going to be uncovering all of the hidden costs of perfectionism.
Both sides.
Yeah, the downsides. And you know what? Believe it or not, we'll even talk about some of the potential benefits.
Really?
Yeah, there can be benefits.
Okay.
We've got some great sources lined up for this deep dive. We've got some psychological studies. We've got some practical guides.
Awesome.
So let's jump in. So first of all, when you hear the word perfectionism, what's your gut reaction? Do you think of it as positive or negative or
Oh, I think
a little bit of both?
a little bit of both, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a loaded word, though.
It is a loaded word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky because,
Well-
like you were saying, sometimes we think of perfectionism. It's like, oh, they're such a high achiever, or they've got such incredible drive.
Right, exactly. And we call them a perfectionist.
Right.
But what our sources are pointing out is that there's this super subtle but crucial difference
Okay.
between striving for excellence and then kind of falling into this perfectionism trap.
Uh-huh.
And it's not just about having these high standards.
Right.
It's about the belief that anything less than perfect is unacceptable.
Okay, so that's where it comes a problem, right?
Right.
When it's anything less than perfect
Is a failure.
is I'm a failure. It's
Yeah.
you're setting yourself up for constant disappointment because no one's perfect.
Right.
No. And if you're always aiming for this flawless ideal,
You're always going to fall short.
you're going to feel like you're never good enough. And what's interesting is that this trap, this perfectionism trap, it can actually manifest in different ways. And, our sources, they identify three main types
Oh, okay.
of perfectionism.
Interesting.
So we've got self-oriented perfectionism,
Sorry.
where you hold yourself to these impossible standards.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have other-oriented perfectionism,
Oh.
where you expect that same flawlessness from everyone around you.
Oh, so you're projecting it outward.
Yes, projecting it outwards. And then finally we have socially prescribed perfectionism, where you feel this intense pressure to live up to society's expectations of what perfect is.
Societal pressure?
Yeah. So
Yeah, that-
three different faces of perfectionism.
I like that.
Right.
I like that.
But can you give me some real world examples? Because I'm trying to picture this in my head.
Yeah, go.
What does this actually look like?
Yeah, so let's start with that classic self-oriented perfectionist.
Oh, okay.
So imagine a student who's pulling all-nighters,
Okay.
not just for good grades,
Right.
but because anything less than an A+ feels like a personal failure.
Oh, yeah.
Their self-worth is totally wrapped up in their academic performance. They're sacrificing sleep and health and maybe even relationships, all for this image of being flawless.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be isolating too,
Totally.
because you're so focused on your own performance.
And you're pushing people away, potentially.
You're pushing people away. Exactly.
Yeah.
What about other-oriented perfectionism?
Oh,
What does that look like?
So for this one, think of a manager who micromanages their team
Okay.
to the point where everyone feels stifled
Yeah.
and demoralized.
Mhm.
They might have good intentions.
Uh-huh.
They want the best possible outcome for a project, but
Mhm.
their need for control and their inability to accept anything less than their own definition of perfect
Yeah.
creates a toxic work environment.
It's interesting because I feel like I've definitely worked with people like that. And it's hard because you can tell they have good intentions, but the way they go about it,
It backfires.
it totally backfires. Yeah. And it makes you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells
Totally.
and never good enough.
Right, exactly.
So, okay. So we got self-oriented, other-oriented. What about that last one?
Socially prescribed.
Yeah, socially prescribed.
This one's a big one.
This one feels very relevant.
Oh, especially in today's world
Yeah.
with social media.
Picture the influencer
Oh, yeah.
who's curating that perfect life
Yeah.
online.
All the filters.
All the filters, and they're constantly worried about the likes and the comments and the followers.
Oh, yeah. It's all about the image.
It's all about projecting this image of effortless perfection.
Right.
But behind the scenes, they might be struggling with anxiety
Totally.
or body image issues or just the constant pressure to keep up this facade.
Right, and it's not just coming from social media either.
Right.
It's family, it's cultural expectations, the media we consume.
It's everywhere. It's like we're bombarded with these images of perfect bodies, perfect relationships, perfect lives, and it's easy to internalize that and start feeling like
Like we're not measuring up.
we're not measuring up.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these 3 different faces of perfectionism: the self-critic, the control freak, and the image obsessed.
I love it.
But here's the thing. You would think all this striving for flawlessness
Hey, you think it's a good thing?
would lead to success, right?
Right.
But you mentioned this perfectionism trap.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean?
Okay, so that's a great question, and that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
One of the biggest paradoxes of perfectionism is that it can actually hinder the very success it's aiming for.
So it's like it's a trap. It's a trap.
Yeah.
And it's like you're so focused on doing everything perfectly that you're paralyzed by the fear of failure.
Exactly. You're so scared to mess up
So scared to mess up.
that you don't even start,
You don't even start, or you procrastinate,
or you self-sabotage.
or you self-sabotage because it feels safer
Yeah, then the potential sting of not being perfect.
than like putting yourself out there
Yes,
and risking failure.
exactly.
One of the sources we looked at used this really interesting analogy.
Okay.
They said it's like a car
Okay.
stuck in the mud,
Oh, yes.
spinning its wheels.
I can see that.
There's a lot of effort, maybe even passion drive,
Uh-huh.
but you're not actually making any progress.
You're going nowhere.
You're just stuck.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not about laziness
No.
or a lack of ambition.
Right.
It's this underlying fear.
Mm.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
I've had projects that I put off for weeks, sometimes even months,
Yeah.
because I was so afraid of not doing it perfectly.
I don't want to mess it up.
I don't want to mess it up.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather not even try
Right.
than risk messing up.
It's that fear of judgment, right?
Yeah.
Of making mistakes
Right.
and not living up to these expectations we have for ourselves. And that fear can be so powerful that it keeps us stuck
Stuck.
in this cycle of inaction and self-sabotage.
Yeah, and that's the sneaky thing about the perfectionism trap, right?
Totally.
Because it disguises itself
As something positive.
as conscientiousness or like,
Oh, I have high standards.
I have high standards, but really it's fueled by these deep-seated insecurities
Yeah.
and a fear of judgment.
Hmm.
But what about
Okay.
this has always kind of tripped me out. What if you do push through the fear,
Oh.
you achieve something great?
You do it.
Do perfectionists actually feel satisfied?
That's the question.
Or are they always chasing this elusive ideal
Yeah.
that they can never quite reach?
Ooh, that's a good question. And unfortunately, the answer is often the latter.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Even when perfectionists achieve their goals, they rarely savor the victory.
Really?
Yeah, they're already focused on the next hurdle, the next flaw to fix,
Right.
the next level of perfection to attain. It's like they're constantly chasing a moving target.
And they never get to enjoy it.
And even when they hit it, the target just moves a little bit further away
So it's this never-ending cycle of striving
and never feeling good enough.
and never feeling good enough.
Ah.
Oh, that sounds frustrating.
It can be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to remember that perfectionism isn't just this quirky personality trait.
Right.
It can have some very real and damaging consequences
Okay.
for our mental, emotional, and even physical health.
So it's not just in our heads.
No, it's not just in our heads.
It actually has
Real-world consequences.
real-world consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground here, and it's clear that this perfectionism thing,
It's complicated.
it's a lot more complex
Deeper than we thought.
than I think a lot of us realized. But I don't want to leave our listeners
Yeah.
feeling
We don't want to bum them out.
overwhelmed or discouraged,
No.
because what I'm hearing is that there is hope, right?
There is definitely help.
That we can actually break free from these patterns
We can rewire those thought patterns.
and learn to relate to our goals and our work and even ourselves in a healthier way.
It's about shifting our perspective.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Yeah, how do we get out of this trap?
Where do we even begin?
All right, let's dive into that. One of the most powerful things you can do is to shift your focus
Okay.
from outcomes to process.
Okay.
So instead of obsessing over the end result,
Right.
try to find joy and satisfaction in the journey itself.
I love that. So it's about appreciating the small wins.
Yes.
The challenges you overcome, the lessons you learn along the way.
Totally.
It's about embracing the messiness of the process.
Yes.
Instead of just striving for that picture-perfect outcome.
Exactly.
And one of the sources highlighted a technique
Okay.
called reframing.
Reframing.
That can be really helpful for those perfectionistic thoughts.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So, for example, let's say you make a mistake at work.
Hello.
Instead of beating yourself up.
Right, which is so easy to do.
It is so easy to do.
Like, I'm such a failure. I should have known better.
Why did I do that?
Why did I do that?
Instead of doing that, try reframing it as a learning opportunity.
Ooh, I like that.
So ask yourself,
Okay, what would I ask myself?
what can I learn from this experience?
Okay.
How can I use this to improve my skills?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's taking that negative and flipping it,
Yeah, turning it into a positive.
turning it into a positive.
Yeah, I like that.
And another key strategy is to practice self-compassion,
Self-compassion.
which I know is so hard.
It's so much easier said than done, right?
It is so much easier said than done.
Especially for perfectionists.
Especially for perfectionists, because we're our own worst critics.
We're so hard on ourselves.
How can we actually start being kinder to ourselves?
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah.
One technique that can be helpful is to actually talk to yourself
Okay.
as you would talk to a friend.
Okay.
So instead of saying, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I messed that up, try saying something like, everyone makes mistakes. It's okay to feel frustrated, but I'm going to learn from this and move on.
It's like being your own cheerleader instead of your own worst enemy.
Right.
And speaking of cheerleaders, I think it's important to remember that we don't have to go through this alone.
Oh, absolutely.
Our sources emphasize the importance of seeking support.
Community.
Yeah.
Right.
Whether it's a therapist or a trusted friend or family member.
Their support group.
Or a support group. There are so many resources out there.
And just talking about your struggles
yeah.
with perfectionism can help you feel less isolated.
Less alone.
Yeah, you're less alone.
And gain new perspective.
You can learn from others
yeah.
who've been there.
Who've been there. And I think sometimes just having someone listen and validate your experience
Just to be heard.
can make a huge difference.
And while we're talking about support,
yeah.
we have to talk about social media.
Oh, the double-edged sword.
Right.
Yeah, it can be a breeding ground for comparison and self-doubt, especially for those struggling with perfectionism.
Yeah.
Any tips for navigating that tricky terrain?
Ooh, so many tips.
Yeah.
Okay, first and foremost,
Yeah.
be mindful of the content you're consuming.
Okay.
If you're constantly comparing yourself to others,
Or feeling bad about yourself?
yeah, feeling inadequate after scrolling,
Yeah.
it might be time to unfollow
Unfollow.
those accounts that trigger those negative feelings.
Because we have the power to create our own
Our own online experience.
online experience.
Yes.
And we can choose to follow accounts that inspire us and uplift us.
And make you feel good about yourself.
And make us feel good.
Yeah.
So to recap, we talked about shifting our focus from outcomes to the process.
Yes.
Reframing those negative thoughts, practicing self-compassion,
Right.
seeking support, and being mindful of our social media.
So many good tips.
So many good tips.
But one more thing I want to add
Yeah.
that really resonated with me from our sources
Right.
was the idea of setting realistic goals. Perfectionists, we often set the bar impossibly high,
Uh-huh.
which sets us up for disappointment.
For failure.
Yeah.
So instead of aiming for perfection, try setting smaller,
Achievable
achievable goals.
that you can build on over time
Yes. Breaking those big goals down
into bite-sized chunks.
into bite-sized chunks.
Yes.
And then you can celebrate those small victories along the way.
It helps build momentum.
It helps build momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And remember, it's okay to ask for help.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to do everything on your own.
Delegate.
Delegate.
Seek guidance from mentors or colleagues, or ask a friend for support.
It can make a huge difference.
A huge difference.
So much of perfectionism is tied to this idea that we have to do it all perfectly and we have to do it all ourselves.
We got to let go of some of that control.
Yeah, the control.
And allowing ourselves to be vulnerable.
Vulnerable.
It can be really liberating.
So as we kind of wrap up this first part of our deep dive into perfectionism,
Yeah.
I think the key takeaway is this. It's a journey, not a destination.
Not a destination.
There will be ups and downs, setbacks, triumphs.
But with awareness, self-compassion, and a willingness to challenge those ingrained patterns,
We can break free
we can break free from the perfectionism trap.
and create a life that is more
Authentic.
fulfilling
Yes.
and joyful.
A joy.
More joy.
Less stress.
Beautifully said. It's not about being perfect. It's about progress, self-acceptance, and embracing the beauty of imperfection.
So good.
And remember, you are already enough just as you are. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll be back with more
We'll be back.
soon.
We'll be back.
It's true, though, like you said, it can really impact every area of your life.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, myself included, might just kind of brush it off as just a personality quirk.
Yeah, just like a little thing.
Yeah, but you're saying it can actually have some pretty serious consequences.
It can. It really can.
So what are some of the hidden like what does the research actually say about the impact of perfectionism?
Okay, so let's break it down.
Okay. Let's start with like the mental and emotional toll.
Okay.
Our sources point out this strong link between perfectionism and anxiety and depression.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because think about it, if your self-worth is constantly tied to achieving this impossible standard of perfection,
You're always going to feel like you're not good enough.
you're setting yourself up for disappointment and self-criticism.
It's like you're living under this constant cloud of pressure, never really able to relax.
Right, and that pressure can manifest in different ways.
Okay, how so?
For some people, it leads to procrastination and avoidance.
Oh,
They're so afraid of messing up that they put off tasks or miss deadlines,
or they don't even try.
or they avoid opportunities altogether.
Oh, wow.
For others, it might be like intense anxiety racing thoughts,
Panic attacks?
even panic attacks.
Wow, so it can really run the gamut.
And over time, this chronic stress can lead to burnout, emotional exhaustion.
Yeah, just feeling completely depleted.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned procrastination.
And I'm realizing that's something I've always struggled with. And I always thought it was because I was lazy or disorganized. But now I'm wondering if it's tied to this fear of not being perfect.
It makes sense, right? Because if you don't start,
You can't fail.
you can't fail. Exactly.
So it's not about laziness at all.
No, it's about this underlying fear of judgment,
Of making mistakes.
of not living up to these expectations we have for ourselves.
And that fear can be so powerful that it keeps us stuck.
In this cycle of inaction and self-sabotage.
So it's not just about the internal struggle either, right? Perfectionism can also affect our relationships with other people.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I can see how constantly striving for perfection could create tension and conflict, but how does it actually play out in our interactions?
Okay, so let's go back to those different types of perfectionism we talked about.
Okay.
If you're a self-oriented perfectionist,
So you're really hard on yourself.
you're hard on yourself, but you're also likely to project those same high standards onto others.
Mm-hmm.
And this can show up as being overly critical,
Okay.
judgmental, or even controlling in relationships.
Yeah. It's like you're holding everyone around you to this impossible measuring stick,
And no one can measure up.
and no one can measure up. And
Right.
that can be so damaging to relationships.
Absolutely. It can create resentment, distance, lack of trust.
Yeah.
Your partner, your friends, your family members might feel like they can never do anything right.
Like they're constantly walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the other-oriented perfectionist?
The one who's projecting it outwards.
Yeah, how does their need for control impact their relationships?
Okay, so imagine like a parent who micromanages their child's every move,
Oh, yeah.
from their homework to their extracurricular activities to their social life.
They want them to be perfect.
They want the best for their kid, but they want them to succeed and excel in every area.
But it can backfire.
But this constant pressure and scrutiny, it can backfire.
Yeah.
It can stifle the child's creativity,
Independence.
independence, and self-esteem.
Yeah.
And it creates a lot of tension and conflict within the family.
Yeah, it's like they're robbing their child of the opportunity to learn and grow from their own mistakes.
And that can have long-lasting consequences
Wow.
for the child's development and their future relationships.
And then there's the socially prescribed perfectionist, right?
They might feel this immense pressure to maintain a perfect image,
Not just for themselves.
not just for themselves, but for their partner or their family.
It's a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure.
Okay, so we've talked about the mental and emotional costs, the relational costs. Are there any other areas of our lives where perfectionism can kind of wreak havoc?
You know, there's one more.
Okay.
Our sources talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
It can actually take a toll on our physical health.
Really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, when you're constantly striving to be perfect, you're putting your body under a lot of stress.
Makes sense.
And that can lead to a weakened immune system,
Okay.
digestive problems,
Oh, wow.
sleep disturbances, even chronic pain.
So it's not just like feeling stressed or anxious. It can actually manifest in physical symptoms.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the thing is, a lot of people who struggle with perfectionism don't even realize how much it's impacting their health.
Because they're so focused on other things?
They're so focused on achieving their goals and meeting deadlines and maintaining a certain image,
That they ignore their body.
they ignore the warning signs.
Wow, so it's like they're so caught up in this pursuit of perfection that they're neglecting their own well-being.
And that's why it's so important to talk about it,
To bring awareness to it?
to break this stigma
Yeah,
and help people understand that it's not a virtue.
it's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
But there's good news.
Okay, what's the good news?
There are things we can do to overcome it.
So there are things we can do to overcome it.
We can.
Okay, good.
We can.
Because we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
And it's clear that perfectionism is more complex.
Yeah, a lot more.
That I think a lot of us realize.
Deeper than we thought.
Yeah, but I don't want to leave our listeners feeling overwhelmed or discouraged.
Right.
What I'm hearing is that there's hope, right?
Yes, there's definitely hope.
We can break free from these patterns
Absolutely.
and learn to relate to our goals and our work and even ourselves in a healthier way.
Totally.
So where do we begin? What are some concrete steps we can take?
Okay, so one of the most powerful things you can do is to shift your focus
Okay.
from outcomes to process.
Okay.
Instead of obsessing over the end result,
Right.
try to find joy and satisfaction in the journey itself.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So it's like appreciating the small wins, the challenges you overcome, the lessons you learned along the way.
Yeah, all of that.
It's like embracing the messiness of it all.
The messiness of the process.
Instead of striving for that picture-perfect outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of our sources highlights this technique called reframing.
Reframing.
Yeah, reframing.
What is that?
Okay, so it can be super helpful in challenging those perfectionistic thoughts.
Okay.
So let's say you make a mistake at work.
Happens to the best of us.
Happens to all of us, yeah. Instead of beating yourself up with thoughts like,
I'm such a failure.
oh, I'm such a failure.
I should have known better.
I should have known better.
Try reframing it
Okay, how do we do that?
as a learning opportunity.
Okay, I like that.
So ask yourself, what can I learn from this?
Good question.
How can I use this to improve
Turn it into a positive.
instead of dwelling on the negative?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
And another key strategy
Okay.
is to practice self-compassion,
Oh, that's a hard one.
which I know is so hard.
Especially for perfectionists.
Especially for perfectionists because we're so used to being our own worst critics.
It's true.
Like, how can we start being kinder to ourselves?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
One technique that I read about was to actually talk to yourself as you would talk to a friend.
Oh, that's a good one.
So instead of saying, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I messed that up,
Which is so easy to do.
so easy to do.
Right. Try saying something like, okay, everyone makes mistakes. It's okay to feel frustrated, but I'm going to learn from this and move on.
Give yourself a break.
Give yourself a break.
Look
Exactly.
like you're being your own cheerleader instead of your own worst enemy.
Yeah. You need your own hype team.
And speaking of cheerleaders,
Yeah.
our sources emphasize the importance of seeking support.
Community.
Community.
Yes.
Whether it's a therapist or a trusted friend or family member.
Support group.
Or a support group, yeah.
There are so many resources out there.
And I think sometimes just having someone listen and validate your experience can make a world of difference.
Just to be heard.
You know, we've got to address the elephant in the room.
What's that?
Social media.
Ah, yes.
Double-edged sword.
It can be so tricky.
It can be so tricky because on the one hand, it can be a great way to connect with people,
Find information.
find information, build community,
But,
but it can also be a breeding ground for comparison and self-doubt,
and that can be really hard,
especially for perfectionists.
especially for perfectionists. Yeah.
So any tips for navigating that tricky terrain?
Ooh, so many tips.
Yeah.
Be mindful of the content you're consuming.
Okay, so like what you follow, who you follow?
Exactly. If you find yourself constantly comparing yourself to others or feeling bad about yourself after scrolling,
It might be time for an unfollow spree.
it might be time to unfollow. Yeah, those accounts that trigger those negative feelings.
And I think it's so important to remember that what we see on social media is often a curated highlight reel.
It's not real life.
It's not real life.
People are only showing you the good stuff.
Yeah, they're presenting the best versions of themselves.
Right.
And often airbrushing out the imperfections and the struggles.
It's like comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah, and remember, you have the power to create your own online experience.
You can curate your own feed.
You can curate your own feed.
Right, and make it a place that feels good.
So to recap, we talked about shifting our focus from outcomes to process.
Yes.
Reframing negative thoughts.
Love that one.
Practicing self-compassion. So important.
Seeking support,
Community.
community,
Yes.
and being mindful of our social media consumption.
There's one more thing I want to add.
Yeah.
Setting realistic goals.
Okay.
Perfectionists often set the bar impossibly high.
Yeah, we do.
Right.
Right.
And that sets us up for disappointment and frustration.
Because we can never reach it.
We can't reach it. It's too high.
Yeah.
So instead of aiming for perfection,
Okay.
try setting smaller, achievable goals.
Bite-sized chunks
Bite-sized chunks.
that you can build on.
Time. Yeah.
And celebrate those victories.
Celebrate those wins, yes.
And remember, it's okay to ask for help.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to do everything on your own.
Delegate.
Delegate.
Ask for support.
Ask for help.
It makes a huge difference.
I guess.
So much of perfectionism is tied to this idea that we have to do it all perfectly and we have to do it all ourselves.
And letting go of that control can be so liberating.
It can be really freeing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into perfectionism,
I think the key takeaway is this. It's a journey.
it's a journey, not a destination.
Not a destination,
There will be ups and downs, setbacks and triumphs.
but with awareness, self-compassion, and a willingness to challenge those ingrained patterns,
We can break free
we can break free from that perfectionism trap,
and create a life that is more authentic
more fulfilling,
and joyful.
more joy, less stress.
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect. It's about progress, self-acceptance, and embracing the beauty of imperfection.
I love that.
And remember, you are already enough just as you are. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into perfectionism.
See you next time.